who doesn't know it yet. So Students for Liberty is an international network of students who are engaged with the topics of liberty on a political, economic, and societal level. Normally, we host conferences, such as our regional conferences in every country, seminars, talks, and during Corona times now, we also host webinars, such as our Spring of Liberty series right now. And our aim is to get in touch with students all over the world and interested people, of course, in the topics of liberty and a free society. So Students for Liberty, originally formed in 2008, now has more than 1,000 student groups distributed all over the world, ranging from Europe, from the US, America, Latin America, Africa, Asia, all over the world. So we're right now in our 5th week of the Spring of Liberty, the Frühling der Freiheit. Actually, because our regional conference could not take place in May this year. So we're glad to share our contents now online with you and people around the world. So today I am really glad to introduce and interview our tonight's guest, Titus Gebel. Titus Gebel is founder, president, and the CEO of Free Private Cities Incorporated. He's a German entrepreneur and holds a PhD in international law, and he's the author of Free Private Cities, Making Governments Compete for You. So what will be the program for tonight? First of all, we will do an interview with Titus, and then we will get into a question and answer session where you can pose your questions on YouTube stream or on Zoom webinar. So hello, Titus.
Hello, Madeleine.
How are you doing?
I'm good, but locked in here in Monaco.
You're in Monaco. Wow. How is it going there?
Well, it's raining, so the exact opposite of what you would expect. But I must say that all the last days we had really perfect weather. Mm-hmm. But it's really a very hard lockdown here, basically the same as in France.
Well, yeah, so we're glad that we have this online meeting now with you, and we can anyway share our contents and, well, the ideas of Free Private Cities now today with you. But first of all, I would get into a little introduction of your person and actually ask you how and why did you actually become a libertarian?
Yeah, I think I was a liberal or classical liberal all of my life, but I didn't realize that because when I was young, it was not taught. It was just not talked about what it means being a classical liberal. And so far, I started in the conservative movement as a young man or student. But then really discovered soon that my real destination is in favor of freedom, economic and political freedoms. And coming to libertarianism was basically caused by the disappointment on the liberals that we had in Germany, right? I mean, liberals in Germany is still more classical liberal than you would say is liberal means in the US, but it's coming closer today. That is only another type of social democracy. And insofar, I was, especially after the GFC in 2008, I said, okay, this is, we have to do something about it, right? Because it's not about greed and capitalism that is our problem. But this was what everybody was saying. And I was sure that this is not an explanation for the GFC because this has always been around. But it has always been greed, and capitalism is also, it's a discovery, it's not an invention. So it always was there. So there must be another explanation. And then I basically, well, read a lot of books, came into the Ludwig von Mises and everything that is available in US, the Jeffrey Tucker and all that. And eventually, and of course, Ayn Rand, and eventually, well, said, okay, this is right, this is correct, and it's in line with what the old philosophers have already discovered, right? That the only legitimate function of state can be protection of life, liberty, and property, and for several reasons, right? And that is what I say, okay, if this is true, and I think it's true, I have to be libertarian.
Thank you very much for your introduction. So we will get now into the topic of today's night. So you must know libertarian ideas, they don't have really easy times during Corona crisis right now. People actually oppose capitalism, they criticize the models of free markets, some even wish stronger state intervention and political guidance. Nevertheless, tonight we're going to discuss a completely different model of societal organization to the nation state, and this is called free private cities. It's a concept or idea developed by Titus Gebel. And Titus, tell us, what is actually the story of free private cities, and why should we actually listen to the concept?
Yeah, because as a libertarian, you might have recognized that there's no demand for our ideas from the majority of the people, right? Let's put it frankly that way. This is nothing you can convince a majority of. Why? Because you have to compete against political competitors who are promising free lunch. And your counteroffer is that people should take care about themselves. And of course, you can offer more freedom, but I think it's more attractive for the majority. At least this is my experience, my takeaway after 30 years of political activism. That people who are promising, we are taking the risk away from your lives, we are giving you free lunch and you are entitled to everything, that is much more attractive than being self-responsible, than be on the free market and that. So that means in an election, a libertarian candidate can only say, vote for me, I do nothing for you, right? And this is not attractive, and it will never be. I would say it's absolutely no chance that you ever get a majority in any democracy. And insofar, I came up with an idea that says, okay, we don't need a majority if we just create a new product and the participation is 100% voluntary. Then you don't need to convince a majority, but you can make use of the product idea from the free market or from the market that you say, hey, anybody's allowed to create a new product, and then we will see if there's demand. So that is basically that was the idea about how to do that and why at all. So if you want, I can tell something about the model, the concept along the slides of my normal presentation, and in a nutshell, basically tell the story.
Sure. You told me before that you prepared some slides. So I suppose you can now share your screen so everybody can have a look on the principles of free private cities.
Yeah. So, okay, can you see it?
Yes, I can see it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, this is about free private cities, why this is an alternative, and what are the features. And now, let me see, okay. You may have heard about Francis Fukuyama, that this is an American scholar who came out with the idea that after the fail of communism, Western democracies would be the end of history, right? So there would be no other form of government that would be superior, and therefore we have reached a kind of an end of a development. And I think this is wrong. And why is it wrong? Because it's a completely misunderstanding, a misconception of what we actually have. And what we are seeing is, I think in the meantime, most people are a little bit doubtful about this prediction of the end of history. But what we are seeing is governments are suffering all over the place, also in the Western countries, legal uncertainty. What does that mean? That means you have a rule and next year you have another rule. And the year after you have another rule. And even if there's an election, you do not know who will win and what will happen afterwards. That is absolutely legal uncertainty, not only for businesses, but also for every single person like you and me and everybody who wants to know about how will my pension look like, because I don't know if the rules are going to change in 2 years. The same applies to political instability. That is related to the first topic, right? If there's another group or another party gaining the election, they will unwind many rules, and then a lot of people will be dissatisfied, and then you go to court and you don't know what the court will say, what the judgment will be. So there's a lot of legal and political instability. Cronyism, that is what happens over time. If there's a group of people who have more power than the rest, they will favor their buddies, and this also happens in democracies. And of course, corruption, right? Corruption is certainly worse in developing countries, but it is there. In a way, it is not only with money, but it's also with doing favors and all that. And take, for example, that people who have been ministers for a certain area, then after their political career, immediately switch to private companies who have been active in this very area, right? So also very problematic. So, and why does it operate so poorly? It's because basically the structure and incentives are so much different from what we have on the market, right? In the market, it's you cannot force people to buy your product. And if you sell a product, you are responsible that the product is as good as you described it. If not, you are liable with your personal assets. And you have therefore an incentive to sell a good product, to expand and to be on the market. A politician not really has an incentive to do good, because, I mean, what is the worst that can happen to him or her? Is that he's elected out of office with a full pension, right? That's the worst case. Well, as an entrepreneur, I can go insolvent. If people are not buying my products because they are bad, I'm going insolvent, right? And I cannot force people to buy that. Now, politics has no real incentive that the society is flourishing. Why? Well, they have a call option on the assets of their citizens, right? That is the most comfortable position you can ever have. A call option on all the wealth of all the people in the country means you have absolutely no risk. So this is, in a nutshell, the big problem. And it's a very, very large problem that is completely overlooked by Fukuyama with the end of history. So, and then people are talking about the social contract, right? So it's saying, hey, we have a social contract that is basically, this guy here is Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He's one of the most famous scholars who have brought up this idea that actually the governed and the governing people have a contract. But even he said, even majority rule is subject to prior agreement and requires initial consent of every single person. What does this mean? It means we cannot just agree now in this webinar, there will be majority rule, and we agree that the minority has to pay $1,000 to each of us. It's not possible, right? The minority would say, we never agreed to that kind of majority. And exactly that is true for everything. And you never heard that when they talk about Rousseau, that even he had recognized that there's a problem, because there's no society where this is the case, right? So we are normally born into a society where we just have to accept the majority rule or we have to leave. And we don't know what the majority will decide. And they can basically expropriate us. That's a problem. And that is a problem in all societies, in all democracies. And the problem is the social contract. It's a fictional contract, right? I mean, what good is a contract if one side can change the contract anytime? And it's never us. It's always the other side that's changing contracts. So this is something people understand. Right? There's something wrong. And now my idea, bringing this to why, what can be done about that? Well, what can be done about that in a libertarian sense? It's easy. I mean, if we are really convinced that free markets are the best means to counter poverty and scarcity and make good distribution of everything, well, then let's transfer these ideas to what I call the market of living together. And this is the biggest market of all. Governance is the world's largest industry. About 30% of global spending is on government and all related things. So that makes it the largest market, bigger than health, bigger than manufacturing, bigger than energy. But it's highly concentrated and inefficient. 5% of the market participants control 80% of the market. And now 90% lose money every year. Right? Imagine this would be the case in another market. Everybody would say, hey, there's an opportunity for a new product. And according to polls, 80% of all people are dissatisfied with how their nation is governed. That is, I mean, if you put this together, basically an oligopoly, 90% are losing money, 80% of the customers are dissatisfied. Well, obviously, there's a chance for new products in this market. Right. And now what kind of product do I have in mind? Well, again, it's called a free private city. And the idea is just the protection of life, liberty, and property as the core function of a state is provided by a private governance service provider, right? Governance is a service. It's nothing more. It's what do people look like? They look, okay, do people want? They want to live in security. They want to go out of the house without being robbed or killed. Everybody has this interest. Even a criminal prefers a safe environment to anything else, that he's not just getting robbed again in the next minute. So everybody has the interest to live in peace. And this is something you don't need a state, you don't need a king for that. A private company can provide it, right? And now that is the first step. The second step is, okay, there must be some rules of living together. And there comes a price with that, right? Security is not for free. So these rights and obligations would be part of a residence contract. But this time it's not a fictional social contract. It's a real written contract. It's a service contract, nothing more. And it clearly lays out, okay, these are the rights and these are the obligations. This is what I have to pay and this is what I get for it. And now here's the big difference. The operator cannot change the contract unilaterally. The majority cannot change the contract. This is a big protection. Every single one has a contract. So even if your fellow citizens say, hey, we want to change the contract, you say, I don't, right? And that is the big difference to today's societies. And of course, there will be conflicts of interest between the people, between residents and operator, or contract citizens and the city operator. And there will be an independent arbitration panel foreseen for that, like in international trade, right, which is outside of the organization of the city operator. This is nothing new. This is already existing. And residents can say, oh, I don't like it anymore, can go anytime. Right? Maybe they lose what they have paid for this year, which is probably not more than $1,000. That is, maybe they lose if they leave early, but that's all. Right? So you can go anytime. You can even keep if you have an apartment, you will remain the owner, but there's no force, no coercion. So what is the big difference? Better incentive, skin in the game. The operator has skin in the game. He can be held liable for malperformance. Let's assume you pay $1,000 a year for security. Then you are robbed. You say, hey, wait a minute, city operator, I paid $1,000 and I was robbed. You owe me damages. And that's exactly right, right? That is a service. Bad service, you are entitled to damages. The other thing is then the operator says, hey, I have introduced a new rule and you're not allowed any longer to open your shop. And you said, hey, wait a minute, I have a contract and it says I'm allowed to do any kind of business. So, and the operator cannot just do that, right? Of course, the operator could say, hey, I don't care what the arbitration panel is saying because I have security forces, right? I just kick you out, I have the bigger guns. Yeah, true, he could do this as a cruise ship captain could let flock his customers, right? But then nobody will come and people will leave the private city, and there will be no more possibility to open up other free private cities if an operator behaves like that or behaves like a dictator. So he has a clear commercial incentive to treat his customers well and thereby have a higher valuation for his project. So he has an incentive, like the cruise ship captain, right, who's the absolute king on the high seas. He has all full powers, but he's not making use of that powers to the disadvantage of his passengers because of commercial interest. And that is exactly comparable here with the free private city. So why start small, not turning over whole countries? Well, it's a very high cost of failure. It's a high political price of implementation of really making this in a whole country. And there will never be a majority for that, as I said before, right? Because in a free private city, first and foremost, people have to take care of themselves. They're responsible for their own actions. And there's no free lunch and there's no right to live on the expense of others, right? There will be social security, insurance, and all that. But the principle is you have to take care of yourself. Very, very unattractive in today's world, right? For the majority, not for the good people, for the people who are willing to create something. They, of course, would love this, but we are very, very tiny majority. And insofar, we focus on very small areas, special zones. It's a low cost of failure. If it goes wrong, only volunteers, it's not disturbing the whole country, right? Can be implemented much faster. We can use best practices from all over the world, and it can serve as a model if it's working, right? Maybe sometimes people would say, hey, we still don't like your libertarian approach, but we like your idea that everybody has a contract. And now we go back to our government and say, we want a contract too, right? So insofar, this could be, even if it remains a niche product for many, many years, could be really something that is becoming a kind of a disruptive technology in the market of living together. And the result, if it goes well, is you have legal certainty plus guaranteed security plus economic and personal freedom plus professional administration minus political conflict, right? There's no room for political conflict because you know that you cannot influence the contracts of your neighbors, of your fellow citizens. You cannot impose your will upon them, right? So, and everybody has a really, really big room of freedom to maneuver. So there will be long-term stability and prosperity under such a model. Well, how can it happen? Well, we have to find a host nation. So there's no territory in the world that is unclaimed. And if it is, probably not long. So we have to create a win-win scenario that is, okay, we have to offer something to the host nation, offer an advantage, which is we bring investment, jobs, stability into that region or that part of the country which is totally backlashed. And that is a win-win scenario, right? Because the government cannot lose much, especially in developing countries. There's an area which is nothing happens there. This can only get better. And so that is the path of getting these free private cities, or we call it prosperity zones, which is basically the same, but it's more like a special economic zone. So it's more known. This is how we think can we establish the first project, because just making this happen in Western countries, it's too difficult at the moment. That can change if political stability is decreasing, then maybe people are open to new ideas. At the moment, not. But in developing countries, it's different stories, and we have first projects that are indeed underway. And that is the conclusion. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. So this is the strategy. That is how we want to work. I think this is it's still very difficult, but it's much easier than turning existing societies into libertarian societies. So Free Private Cities is an international company focused on the incubation and establishment. We have a consulting company called Tipolis, which is also advising new projects worldwide, which are more from the new special economic zone sector and trying to transform them into special economic zones plus or prosperity zones, which is just another name for free private city. I've written a book which is available in several languages and also as an audio book. So if you're interested, have a look into that. All the different questions are answered there. And if you have more questions, there's a newsletter, a website called freeprivatecities.com with a lot of information material. So that is in a nutshell what Free Private Cities is all about.
So thank you very much for the introduction on the concept of free private cities. We're still into theory right now, and I actually want to ask you one question. So let's imagine we start a free private city nowadays. You said in a developing country. Let's just think in theory. So the free private city, this is one of the questions I was concerned with actually, normally needs a billionaire or a big company starting that free private city. Yeah, because you need to build infrastructure, water supplies, electricity. And well, one of the criticisms is that where the money is the power. So how can, inside the free private city, how can you prevent that the rich or the company does not abuse the power on the long term? Yeah,
I think the answer is that you have a special company, which is the city operating company, right? That is basically my company, or would be my idea. And we have our model is that we are offering this contract model, that governance as a service, and you are protected by this contract. And of course, there will be big real estate developers which have a lot of money, which will maybe even create their own quarters in the city with slightly different rules. But still, everybody would have to contract with me. And that is a prerequisite. So I'm not making any deals with real estate developer if they're not accepting that model, right? Because then I would say, okay, make your own free private city. And they can't, because they have never thought about all these, I can say that because I have first experience. They have never thought about all these political implementations and how this would work. So it's not necessary that you need a billionaire, because more or less this is a normal real estate development. You would say, look, here's the offer to a normal real estate development company. I would go to them and say, look, what I can offer you is, we have here bought the land and you can develop that and we sell it to you. It's in a developing world with a developing world price. And we turning this whole free private city into a first world environment, which will increase the prices, or normally it should work like that, right? So this is why it could be interesting and attractive for ordinary real estate developing companies to do that. So it's not necessary that you have one big guy with big pockets who's then making all the rules, right? Mm-hmm.
So there is a consent among people who are living there, you're saying?
Yeah, it must be. So it's not possible. That's why we are starting this unsettled territory, right? There's nobody living there. So everybody who is coming in based on the citizens contract, where we have say, well, this is a common law system, or this is a civil law system. This is basically here, there's a police, the police has certain rights. And other than that, we have some environmental things and whatever. So everybody who is coming is knowing in advance what the rules will be, and the rules cannot be changed. I mean, there will be some elements like traffic rules where we say, hey, traffic rules can be changed by the operator or something like that, right? But even this, you know in advance, right? You know, okay, there are some areas which could be changed. I don't like that, so I don't go there, right? Others say, okay, these are all small areas, and the big areas concerning your liberties, they are protected and they are unchangeable. And especially we cannot change what you have to pay, right? I mean, this is there's no call option of your assets. It's not there. It has a clear fixed price, like in any service contract, and maybe you have an inflation clause or that, but that's all, right? And that is basically giving everybody the legal certainty who is coming, hey, I know what the rules will be and they're not going to be changed every year.
Okay, but so you still say that there is learning and there are changes that the free private cities can make according to the changing environment, for example.
Yeah, but I think this is a little bit, I mean, this is one, most people today say, hey, you can't do that because changing environments ever needs changing rules. I doubt that, because we have lived, especially common law idea is that you don't have rules for everything. You have a framework of rules, and this is also our idea. You have a framework of rules, and if a new thing pops up, which is not addressed by an existing rule, and you say, okay, then let's just try to figure it out somehow. And if there's a conflict, then it goes to the court or to the arbitration. And like in common law, then the court says, okay, then we decide about that. And from then on, this would be basically the rule for this particular situation. We have done this all over the world for thousands of years like that. Why shouldn't it work, right? People, I think there's a misconception. People think that an ever complicated society, which we are, no doubt, needs ever complicated rules. And I say, no, the opposite is true. You need less rules. There will be some gaps, no doubt, but the rule is clear. Whereas if you try to regulate everything, there will be loopholes, there will be unclarity, there will be contradiction with old rules. So this is a much worse situation than having only a framework of rules. And if there's really an unsolvable problem, well, the courts should decide. And that is, I think, that is our approach. So there is no need to change rules any year.
Okay, thank you very much for your answer. So I am actually going into the practice part. And last time we met, Titus, it was at the regional conference in Germany in 2018. And back then you were already talking about first intents to establish a free private cities. It was in Latin America, I remember. And I wanted to ask you about the recent developments, like the free private cities set in practice. How does it work? Which are recent developments? And how do you contribute to a constructive output?
Yeah, indeed, there's a project in Latin America, and the idea was to make it public in mid-April, right? Just a couple of days ago. But this was due to the coronavirus, we had to postpone that. And the other finding was that there was a Swiss consul once said me, he said, Titus, this is a great idea, but the problem is a free private city has 3 words, and 2 out of them politicians doesn't like. This is the word free and the word private. And I said, basically, you're right. So maybe we call it a prosperity zone, right? Or whatever kind of zone, or charter city, or there are all kinds of terms. And the project in Latin America is a project in Honduras, which probably most people know in the meantime. It's not really a full free private city, it's more a hybrid model, because when the Hondurans made their law, they didn't have a free private city in mind, they had a kind of a Hong Kong in mind. But this was, with my help, we created basically a private envelope for that Hong Kong. And everybody gets a contract. So it's very close to my ideas. They will have an own dispute resolution system, our own security, again, an own contract system. So this is, there's even an own property registry now approved by the Honduran government for this area. So this is very, very fascinating new model. It is a model where I'm not basically the main guy in the driver's seat. I'm just an investor, but I have contributed a lot to the legal framework, right, which has been approved in the meantime by the Honduran government. And I'm looking forward that this project is basically published soon, and then everybody can apply for residency, can become a member, can have a look what the rules are. And this is really a breakthrough, and I think very, very interesting what is happening there. At the same time, I have talked to other governments and try to figure out if they are maybe interested in some kind of free private city or prosperity zone. And we are currently in discussions with 2 other governments which have indicated interest, right? But it's not easy, because to get this done, you normally need at least a new parliamentary law. In some countries, like in Honduras, even a change of the constitution, which takes a while, right? So we shouldn't expect too much. I mean, this is even more than I expected. I have given myself 10 years after I wrote a book in 2017, and now we have this Honduran project really coming on. Again, which is not exactly a free private city, but it's a very, very interesting model in going in that direction.
So thank you very much. I would be really interested to be updated about the constructive outputs and how's it going on.
So then I would recommend to you and everybody else who's interested to subscribe to our newsletter, right? On the freeprivatecity.com website, because the moment the Honduran project is going public, we will then also send out a message. There will be a website for the project, and then everybody can have a look.
Okay, thank you very much. So in the last few minutes before going to the question and answer session, I would actually like to do a shift to the current Corona crisis, actually. And you know that nation states, their task is to provide us security, provide us like the health system, and in case of Germany, this functions very, very well. So how would actually a free private city deal with crises, viruses such as Corona?
Yeah, pandemic. I mean, this is not so much different, right? Because we are offering by contract that we are protecting your life and your health, right? And I think that the biggest, and we would have an emergency clause in the contract saying if there's a war or natural disaster, we have extra right, and at least there's no public space because we own all the public space, so we can make this regulations. But I think the biggest difference is again the incentive structure, right? Because we are liable, we are full liable as city operator, and I think if there's a coronavirus coming, that is a big problem for a free private city as well, because you have, on the one hand, you have people saying, hey, I paid you for protect my life and my health, and if my grandmother is dying, it's your fault, right? Because you haven't made a lockdown or whatever. And on the other side, people say, hey, I've guaranteed freedoms. You just cannot say this to me. And both parties have the right basically to challenge my measures in front of this arbitration court, right? So that should be the same in our countries, but you've maybe heard from Germany that it's very difficult to go to court to say, hey, we are against those rules, right? If you are not a member of the parliament or something like that, yeah, as a normal person, you can't do that, right? Of course, you can go to the lower courts and say, police has stopped me, I'm going against that. But I think in our society, in the free private city, it's really because you are at arm's length. You are a client, you are a customer, I'm the service provider. If you are dissatisfied, you go to arbitration. In so far, I would have an incentive to do things that protect you, but at the same time, do not shut down you completely. And I would say, because I know that this can happen, everybody knew that before, I would probably be better prepared. In Germany, we have learned that they had made a training program in 2012 where exactly what's happening now was foreseen. And recommendations were, you have to have some mask and ventilators and all that. Nothing happened. There was absolutely no kind of preparation in any country, right? Despite all the experts have said, hey, you should do something for that. So, because again, what can happen to them, right? But in my case, a lot can happen to me. So I would probably be better prepared and would say, okay, what should we do? Probably, because we are a small place, free private city, we close borders and then we test the people within the city. So you can say, hey, maybe nobody has a coronavirus. We can just go on as usual, but we shouldn't let in people from the outside. other than 14 days quarantine, right? So that is probably something which would be easier in a free private city, and in an ideal world, if we really had no cases, could mean that we could continue our daily lives. If there were cases, it's more difficult. Then you have to say, okay, we maybe start with the social distancing and then see what's happening. Because the problem is, if really you don't have enough places in the hospitals and people are dying, that's a problem, right? And this is also a problem in free private cities. But I'm relatively sure that we would more flexible, we would, because of the incentive structure, would be better prepared. We have reserves exactly for those cases. And we would, of course, look all over the world, which things work and which things does not work, because you have also to see what happened in a country like Germany, which was badly prepared. They basically even announced that it's not a problem up to February. And still now the government is more popular than in the last 5 years, right? Because it's normally in a crisis, people tend to go around their leaders, right? So what is the takeaway for them? They can do whatever they want. People are happy, right? And that is not the case in a free private city, because people would just sue me and they would claim damages. So I cannot just say, hey, let's keep the lockdown open, because then people will think, hey, this guy is doing a lot for us. But I have always, every day I have to say, hey, there's a trade-off. If I shut down, then maybe a lot of people will lose their economic basis. And if there are only 1 or 2 cases or 1 or 2 deaths in a city of 20,000, it's not justifying a complete shutdown, right? And every day you have to rebalance. As a politician, okay, if I shut down, I'm on the safe side. So this is the difference. I cannot say that I have a perfect master plan or there's an ideal solution to that. But I think we would be more flexible. We would reopen more early. We would probably be better prepared for that.
Okay, so talking in general terms about crisis, pandemics, or it can be crisis in general. I was actually confronted with a question, what actually happens if the free private city goes bankrupt? Mm-hmm. For example, if there's a major economic crisis, because you have to imagine, like, people settle there, people start having children there, they are raised in this free private city, and they're really like into the culture, into society. They might develop own norms, own values, own practices, own solutions for problems and the like. So what actually happens if the system failed? Yeah,
well, look, it's like any other insolvency, right? Mm-hmm. There is a normal insolvency procedure to say, okay, I have failed. I'm bankrupt. I cannot provide security any longer because I cannot pay the security personnel. And then there's in the contract, there's already an insolvency clause. And in such a case, it's relatively easy, right? Another city operator would take over. If there's nobody, you can think about a resident buyout, right? The residents could say, hey, let's put some money together because we still want to live here. We like, as you have said, we have developed our own culture. We are taking over the city. So that would mean not much difference, because now just the ownership of the city operator has changed. If all the people own the city, that doesn't mean that there's a democracy where you say, hey, from now on we have majority rule, because everybody still would have his contract, right? We would be a client and the owner at the same time, but that is not a problem, right? You have this with banks and insurance companies that is already existing, that model. And insofar, I don't think it's a big problem, especially if there are several city operators. Even it's normal, right? The city operator goes bankrupt, another one will take over, right? And that is, if you think it through, it's not a big difference to a normal insolvency in the market.
Okay, thank you, Titus. Thank you very much for your answers. So let's get into the question and answer session from the audience. Mm-hmm. And Rick is asking, how difficult was it to negotiate the terms with the host nation, for example, in terms of Honduras? In which ways are the cities protected? How will the arbitration with the host nation work?
Yeah, good question. Well, these kind of negotiations are never easy, as you can imagine, because you're basically asking part of their sovereignty. And in the case of Honduras, it was so that the Honduran government by themselves came up with the idea. They say, okay, we think that our system is really not reformable, and so we have to do something new. So that was really helping. But still, you have a lot of, I remember we locked us in for 3 days with the members of the Honduran government to really got to the terms, because having a law is one thing, but then if it goes down to the details, it's another thing. Regarding the other question of how is the city protected, I mean, this is, in a way, you are still part of the host nation. So the military defense is part of the host nation, but you are protected by investor protection clauses. Honduras, for example, is a member of CAFTA, the Central American Free Trade Association. The managing operating company is a US company because the US is also a member of CAFTA, member state of CAFTA. Thereby, we are protected by the CAFTA agreement. If Honduras or any other country in that region say, hey, we disregard our agreements, we just take over the city, then we would say, okay, we have damages, we can claim damages according to the CAFTA mechanism. And that's how it works, right? So that would be a financial burden and a reputational burden for any Honduran president. And I don't think that is going to happen. But of course, there's no 100% security. And but there are normal arbitration procedures. It's not absolutely new, because if the big company is coming, a mining company with a big investment, they normally make a contract with the government and have also arbitration clause in it. That is not special. That's normal in international trade and business. And Honduras, like most countries, has signed the New York Convention, which says that that these countries accept the outcome of arbitrational awards. So we could, if the worst thing happens, we could then at least with our title enforce it by pledging Honduran property outside of Honduras or something like that. And I think this is the deterrence that this is not going to happen.
Okay, thank you very much. So Adolfo is asking, do you think cooperativism could be leveraged to incentivize a private management of services within an established city instead of an up-to-down approach?
Yes and no. I mean, in principle, yes, it's absolutely not a problem. And I think one of my ideas of the free private city, and I wrote it in my book, is that here's my model, but this model can be changed in all directions. It can be changed towards more rules or less rules, right? So you can become a more anarcho-capitalist society, or you can become a more normal cooperative structure or whatever, right? Both is possible. The problem that we have discovered, and that is especially because the advice Oliver Porter gave me, the guy who founded Sandy Springs as a basically privately governed new town in the US, he said this model was copied. Everything is done privately in these cities except police and courts. And they were very successful, and they were copied 10 or 12 times in the meantime, but it never worked with an existing city, never. Even when the city operator offered that he guaranteed that the cost will be 25% lower, no chance. Why? Because people who are at the moment in power, they have concerns that they lose power. People have concerns that they lose jobs to private competition. In a normal city, in a normal community. So probably very, very hard to change existing systems. So even if it's a cooperative, I would advise to start from scratch.
Okay, thank you. So we can go on with the question, is there no over-proportional tax laws for the host state due to migration and establishing companies' headquarters in the free private city?
No, in our case, it is not a tax-based system, it's a fee-based system. You basically get something from us, which is dispute resolution, protection, infrastructure, and you pay for it, defined amount, which is a little bit different in the Honduran model. You will see there have to be taxes because of the legal situation in Honduras. And that is probably something where, indeed, I think this is the background of the question. The problem is, we have no problem with that, but the host nation might have a problem with that because they say they have two problems. One problem is, if they have companies that are just moving, relocating into the free private city, right? And then they lose tax base, right? And that is why they are against it. So that happened here in Monaco in the 60s, where the French government said they had exactly happened that, right? The rich French entrepreneurs moved to Monaco, didn't pay any more taxes in France, still had their income in France. So they said, this is not going to work. We are blocking Monaco now. And demand that everybody in Monaco pays taxes. So there was an agreement at the end, say, hey, people who coming from France to Monaco have to pay taxes to France if they were coming after 62. And that is normally what will happen with the free private city, and special economic zones have a similar problem. We make a deal, right? Say, okay, either we guarantee the host nation their tax base, and say, for example, I had a negotiation with the government in South America saying, hey, what about this? And that was the outcome, more or less. Say, okay, if there are new companies are coming up, we have not a problem. But if existing companies coming from our country, they should still pay taxes to the host nation. I think that's a fair deal, right? So you can solve that. The other problem is international community saying, hey, this is a tax haven, right? And there the strategy is that you don't do things which do not exist otherwise, right? But you have countries where there's a zero tax. So you can say, hey, we are not different than whatever. Panama is a territorial principle. If you only pay taxes if you have income in Panama. So you can put the headquarters there. You have Monaco. You have places like Monaco where there's zero tax. You have a lot of Caribbean states where it's basically zero tax. So you then would put finger to that places and say, hey, we are not different to them. So that is the strategy you're following. But there might be problems indeed if you have zero tax, but international companies are already doing that, right? They're relocating to Dubai because there is no tax.
So, okay, a question aligned with that, like, do you actually need private company operators to build up a free private cities, or could nation state not by themselves establish ones? So the question actually is regarded to why is there no self-government allowed? Like, do we really need an operator or a company putting up that? Or would it also be possible with self-governance of people? The commentary says that Swiss seems to be a good example in combination with low taxes. And is it not risky to trust a company more than citizens themselves?
Well, I mean, ask yourself, would you rather live in a society where you have an operator who is liable before court for his promises that he made in a service contract, or in a society where the citizens just decide according to their will, and you don't know what will the outcome be next year? I mean, I have taken my decision, and that is, everybody can decide for his own. I would say, look, this is a business idea, right? I don't think that self-governance is working because the interests of the people are too diverse, and it will never stop at being let's just create security. No, people will have all kinds of ideas. I mean, look at our states. That's what's happening with democracy and majority rule, is that there are more and more rules any day. I'm restricted by a contract. And the problem with self-governance, the libertarian ideas that you have, basically everybody can hire his own private security, is that this will lead to the biggest security firm running the show at the end, right? Because why should they agree to cooperation or dispute resolution, they are the biggest. And so far, I don't think that this is working, but I might be wrong, right? Then the other thing is, why can states run such places? Well, they could establish a company who is doing that, but normally what happens, we have seen this in some special economic zones in the Middle East. The ruler then who owns the company has decided otherwise and changes all the rules, and that can happen in nation states as well, right? They would just change the rules because the parliament said so. And so far, our system is different. We say we want 99 years of independence and guaranteed semi-autonomy, and then we, on the other hand, stick to our contracts with our citizens. I think that is the only model that couldn't work in the near future, but I might be wrong. But I can only encourage you to try out all kinds of models, because that is how the market is learning, right? This is why competition is so good. It's a learning mechanism.
So yeah, this is really a constructive approach. And as Tom Palmer said already 2 weeks before, that libertarians always seek for the constructive approaches to build or to better society. So this is actually a question regarded to what you said before, that it is probably easier to set up free private cities in the third world, like we still say, or in developing countries. So there's a question to Titus. Can you talk more about where in the world would you see low-hanging fruit? So is it in the first world or in the third world? And which organizations do you see as most capable in this space? Please speak frankly, says in the comment.
Yeah, I mean, my personal experience now is that it's in the developing world. Or let's put it that way. If countries have problems, they're more open to that ideas. Can be second world, can be third world. First world normally has not that problems, because that's why they are first world, right? Nevertheless, in Switzerland, there are people who are strongly supporting my idea. There's an initiative, Free Winter Tour, which is a city in the north of Switzerland. And they have this tradition that they are governing themselves, right? Which is, I'm not against governing themselves, but it has to be combined with a contract protecting the individual, right? So because if the operating company is owned by me or the citizens, doesn't make a difference for the model, or by anybody else. So I think that let's answer the second part of the question. I think that the organizations that are based on profit, like myself, have higher chances of success, because it's a libertarian idealist sitting together discussing self-governance is not going to work, right? Because you have 3 people with 4 opinions. And if you really set it up as a for-profit model, then it's clear we have to make profit. There's somebody giving the direction. In this case, it's me, and we're going to do that. But I'm also supporting institutions like the Seasteading Institute, and they have a very interesting approach now in Panama. And I think this is equally has a chance of success, right? Because they're also setting up for-profit companies to make it happen. So it's basically not so much different from my idea, what the Seasteading Institute is doing at the moment. There are other people working on charter cities, which could also work. I think Africa is indeed a place where there are chances, right? But it's also a difficult place. So we will see. I think the more attempts are made all over the world from different organizations and people, the higher the chances that we will get something like that. And I have still high hopes for the Honduran project.
Okay, so there's actually someone seemingly interested in your project, because the question is, how big is the area in Honduras and what is the price in square meters for real estate there?
Yeah, will be published soon. You can say the goal is, the objective is to get an area which is about the size of Monaco, which is 2 square kilometers. On an island for the coast of Honduras. And there's also a price list, but again, it's not published. And I just would ask for some patience.
All right. So maybe one last question, because it's already 7 o'clock. So there are, you said before, similar ideas to free private cities, and there is also the ideas of Markus Krall. Are you familiar with them?
I know Markus Krall. I know him personally, but I don't know that he's active in this sector.
So the comment says, for example, he suggests that citizens must decide either if they want to receive tax money, that means welfare, corporate subsidies, tax-financed salaries, or if they want to vote, but they cannot have both. So what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, it's a reasonable approach. I think Tom Bell has made a proposal that he says, okay, if you have to have democracy, which is maybe necessary because the host nation insists on that, you can do it as a double democracy, right? And it says double is, the first half is people who own shares in the company, in the operating companies, vote. That would basically be the, in a way, Markus Krall's idea. If you contribute with money, you have a vote, right? And then there's a second vote, which is only a negative vote. As a resident, the only physical resident, you can only deny new rules. You cannot create new rules. And that is exactly Markus Krall's idea, because he say, okay, if you can vote money into your pockets, you will do that, right? And that is a big problem of today's democracies. And so far, I think both of these ideas, Markus' ideas and Tom Bell's ideas, are going into the right direction. I don't have this problem because I say there's no democracy. Because you have already, every single one of you has so much liberty, so much more room to decide for yourself. And then there's no need for political participation because you have already self-determination, right? But if there is no, if it has to be the democratic system, I would say yes, we should really go in that direction.
Okay, thank you. Do you have time for one more last question?
I have no, like most of us these times, I have no appointments. Yes, I have time.
All right, so let's discuss maybe the two last questions in the question and answer. So here someone is asking, is there a stock market component with regard to ownership of private governance of a city? In other words, have you, Mr. Gebel, given thought to the idea of citizens of free private cities being shareholders of a city government, which they can freely trade on a global market, effectively introducing a market principle to governance?
Absolutely. So two aspects. One aspect is, we have discussed this also in Honduras, that everybody is basically obliged to buy at least one share of the operating company. This is to align interests. If you become a resident, you should be also a co-owner, right? To align your interests, at least to have a say or to ask questions in the General Assembly. The second is a clearly financial market approach. Yes, absolutely. This should be a stock, a listed company at one point in time. Imagine Singapore was listed at a stock exchange. I mean, they have billions of valuation, right? And that is here the same. That is my idea, right? Form a company, operate a city, go public, right? You have to be transparent. There will be a price tag. If you are successful, then your valuation will increase, and people can basically become also co-owners of these cities. But that doesn't mean that you can change the contract with the residents, right? That has to be clearly separated. It's like you are the owner of a cruise ship. You cannot change the contract that people have made with their travel agency, right? You cannot just change the direction of the cruise ship once they have paid for a Caribbean cruise. And that's the same if you own shares of a city operator. That doesn't mean, even if you're the majority owner, that doesn't mean that you can just change the existing contracts.
Okay, thank you.
More questions?
Yeah, so the last question, since the citizens contract, this question is related to a question that I already posed before, but maybe you can go further into detail. So since the citizens' contract can stipulate that the operator has some leeway to adjust certain rules or institutions without recourse for efficiency's sake, what do you think the chances are that these projects would tend towards greater and greater unilateral operator authority?
Yeah, this is definitely one of the problems. And I think that the answer to that is competition, right? I mean, that is a free private city is not a continent. It's a small place. And if you look at the place where I'm staying, we have a prince who has very strong constitutional rights. He can veto all kinds of legislation that is coming out of the parliament and can make own laws instead. So he could basically demand that I wear a tin hat from tomorrow on. Why is he not doing that? Because he knows that if this happens, we would just leave, right? 80% of the Monaco people are not Monegasque citizens. We are all foreigners. And if this happens, if crazy laws would pop up, we would leave. So competition is keeping him in charge. It's not the constitution or parliament, democracy, or referendums. The same would be true to the city operator here. If I would misuse my leeway or my police force, then it's not an attractive product any longer. So that is my best answer I can give, that competition is keeping me in charge.
All right, thank you. So actually, I would stop the question and answer session right now. I just have one last question. If I was interested in the idea and living in a free private city, where can I inscribe?
Yeah, go to my website, freeprivatecities.com. And at the bottom, there's a subscription for a newsletter. The newsletter is coming every quarter. And once we have a project like the one hopefully soon in Honduras that we can offer, or we can basically, because we are not the operator, we can basically point you to that, we will do that. So you will be the first to hear about that, or amongst the first. And the same is true if others, like the Seasteading Institute, is coming up with a project where you can start becoming a resident or a seasteader. We would also publish this in our newsletter. So you would then learn about that, and then you can go directly to the operating entity.
All right. Thank you very much, Titus. So thank you for your time and for the interesting interview on free private cities. And yeah, from my side, from Students for Liberty, I would like to announce our next webinars. So the 27th of April, we will have Brian Kaplan with us on a topic called Our Friendly Neighborhood Anarchist. And on 3rd of May, we will have Nobel laureate Vernon Smith with us with a topic on A Life of Experimental Economics. So among others, we will have Trevor Burrows with us, Jaron Brooks, Melis Kitzing, Matt and Terry Kibbe. So we're happy to have you again in our channel. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, join us on Facebook or Instagram, and yeah, get the updates on our next webinars on the Spring of Liberty. So to all of you, I wish you enjoyed. I hope you enjoyed it.